The storm wasn't just rain. It was a dense, furious wall of water battering the windshield of the massive Kenworth truck, as if trying to smash right through the glass. Roger, a 55-year-old man with calloused hands and a gaze hardened by millions of miles of solitude, gripped the wheel tight, the roar of the diesel engine and the hypnotic rhythm of the wipers serving as his only company on this back road, forgotten by God and the county maintenance crews. Roger preferred driving at night. The darkness hid the monotonous landscapes and allowed him to be alone with his thoughts, even if sometimes those thoughts were more dangerous than the wet road. He was hauling a load of lumber north through the Midwest, hoping to arrive before dawn, but the torrential downpour was forcing him to slow down. He was in no rush to get home. Ever since his wife passed away 5 years ago, his home was this cab of metal and leather, smelling of stale coffee and tobacco. Suddenly, the powerful xenon headlights cut through the darkness, revealing something that made Roger's heart skip a beat. About 200 yards ahead, on the narrow, muddy shoulder, there were silhouettes. It wasn't an Animal Crossing, nor a broken-down car. They were people. 4 figures walking single file, soaked to the bone, fighting against a wind that threatened to push them into the non-existent traffic. Roger narrowed his eyes, jaw tensing up. His veteran trucker instinct screamed at him, "Don't stop, it's a trap." He'd heard enough stories about assaults on lonely roads where they used decoys to steal the cargo or the truck. His right foot stayed planted on the accelerator, determined to drive right past and leave that unsettling sight behind. After all, the world was full of misery, and he was no saint, just a tired man doing his job. However, as the truck roared closer, the light illuminated a detail that shattered his defensive logic. The smallest figure, a boy who couldn't be more than 7 years old, turned around when he heard the engine. The boy didn't wave, didn't ask for help. He simply looked toward the lights with an expression of absolute terror, clinging tight to the leg of the man walking in front. Roger saw that pale face and those big eyes for a split second, but it was enough. A jolt of electricity ran down his spine. He cursed out loud, slapping the steering wheel with his palm, and slammed on the air brakes. The high-pitched hiss and the screech of tires on the wet asphalt broke the storm's symphony. The enormous vehicle began to slow, grinding to a halt about 50 yards ahead of the family. Roger took a deep breath, knowing he had either just made a reckless mistake or the best decision of his night. Roger rolled down the passenger window just a few inches, keeping the engine running and his hand near the gear stick, ready to flee if he saw a weapon. Through the side mirror, he watched as the man from the group ran toward the cab, leaving the woman and children behind. When the man reached the window, Roger saw the face of pure desperation. He was a young man, maybe 32, but his face was deeply lined with anguish. Water streamed down his face, mixing with what looked like tears. "Sir, please," the man shouted, his voice drowned out by the roar of the rain. "I don't want money. I don't want anything. It's just, my kids can't walk anymore. The little girl has a fever. Just take us to the next town with a roof. I'm begging you, on everything that's holy." There was no threat in his voice, only the broken plea of a father who has failed to protect his own. Roger unlocked the passenger door with a sigh of resignation that weighed heavy on his soul. "Get in, quick," he ordered in a gravelly voice. The man signaled, and the woman ran over with the 2 children. Climbing into the high cab of the truck, it was a real ordeal for them. They were weak and slippery from the mud. When they finally settled into the space behind the seats and the passenger seat, the smell of dampness, old clothes, and fear filled the small space Roger considered his sanctuary. The woman, whose name was Adele, held the little girl in her lap, wrapping her in a shawl that was just as wet as the rest of her clothes. The man, Bradley, sat on the edge of the seat, shaking uncontrollably. Not from the cold, but from the adrenaline of having found a miracle. Roger cranked the heat up high and put the truck back in gear, merging back onto the black road. The silence in the cab was thick, broken only by the hum of the heater and the chattering teeth of the little boy, Timmy. Roger watched the road, but he could feel the stares of his passengers burning into his profile. Friends of tales of kindness, before we continue with this journey that is about to reveal some painful secrets, I want to ask you something important. In many parts of the world, indifference is the norm. Would you guys have stopped on a dark highway, risking your own safety? Comment down below which city you're listening from, and tell me if your heart would have let you just drive on by. Roger knew he'd broken his golden rule: never pick up strangers. But, glancing sideways at Adele trying to dry her daughter's forehead with her own soaked sleeve, he knew that tonight the rules didn't matter. There was something about the silent dignity of that family that reminded him of old times, of suffering that doesn't get posted on social media. "Here, take this," Roger grunted, pointing to a stainless steel thermos and a paper bag on the dashboard. "There's hot coffee and some sandwiches I didn't eat. Eat up." Bradley looked at the food like it was pure gold, but he didn't take it for himself. With trembling hands, he split the sandwich and gave the biggest part to his wife and the kids. Then he poured a little coffee into the thermos lid and offered it to Adele. Roger watched this gesture through the reflection in the windshield. That act of putting family first, even when your own hunger is eating you alive, earned Bradley immediate respect from the trucker. Roger, who had lived surrounded by selfishness at truck stops and warehouses, recognized in Bradley a man of values, a man who had probably lost everything except his honor. "Where were you walking to on a hell of a night like this?" Roger asked, finally breaking the ice. Bradley swallowed the small piece of bread he had allowed himself to eat and cleared his throat. "We were heading to Apple Valley, sir," he replied in a low voice. Roger raised an eyebrow. "Apple Valley is 150 miles from here. At this pace, you would have arrived dead or frozen before sunrise." Bradley lowered his gaze, ashamed by the reality of his situation. "I know, but we got evicted from our trailer this morning after the landlord decided to sell the lot for development. We have no car and no money for the bus. A cousin told me there's work in Apple Valley picking apples during harvest season. We had no other choice but to walk." The rawness of the story hit Roger. It wasn't a spectacular tragedy. It was the silent, bureaucratic tragedy of poverty. Being disposable. The woman, Adele, spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, almost a melodic whisper. "We told the kids it was an adventure, that we were going to see who could last the longest walking in the rain." She stroked the wet hair of her daughter Sophie, who was starting to doze off thanks to the warmth of the cabin. "But they know. Kids always know when their parents are scared." Roger gripped the steering wheel tight. He remembered his own son, whom he hadn't seen in 10 years because of a stupid argument over money and pride. He remembered how he himself had failed to protect his family emotionally, even though they never lacked food. The presence of Bradley and his family in the cabin acted like an uncomfortable mirror, reflecting Roger's emotional poverty against their material poverty. They were hungry, but they had each other. Roger had a $100,000 truck and a decent bank account, but he was completely alone. The rain began to let up a little, turning into a steady drizzle. Roger knew his route passed near Apple Valley, but he didn't go into the town itself. Dropping this families at the town entrance at 3 in the morning wouldn't solve anything. They'd still be on the street, wet and with nowhere to go. An idea began to form in his mind, a dangerous idea that went against his solitary nature. He looked at the worn canvas bag Bradley was hugging against his chest. It was everything he owned. "What do you know how to do, Bradley?" asked Roger, staring at the endless road. "Besides walking in the rain and looking after other people's trailers, what can you do with those hands?" Bradley lifted his head, surprised by the question. "I know mechanics, sir. I used to fix the farm equipment back in my old job, and I know carpentry. My father was a cabinet maker." Roger nodded slightly, filing that information away like a piece of a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to put together yet. The truck continued devouring miles in the dark, but the atmosphere inside the cabin had shifted subtly. It was no longer just a shelter from the rain. It had become a mobile confessional. Roger didn't say anything else about Bradley's skills, but his mind was working at full speed, calculating risks and possibilities. An hour later, the neon lights of a truck stop called the Last Mile Diner appeared on the horizon, a place Roger knew well. Greasy food, strong coffee, and hot showers. "We're stopping," announced Roger, breaking the silence. Bradley tensed up visibly. "Sir, we don't have money to buy anything. We'll stay in the truck and watch your things while you rest." Bradley's humility was painful. He was used to being invisible, to waiting outside while those with money lived their lives. But Roger shook his head as he parked the steel beast between 2 other semis. "Nobody stays waiting in my truck like a guard dog," Roger grunted, killing the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "If I eat, my passengers eat. That's a rule of the road. Besides, those kids need to use the bathroom and wash their faces. Don't argue with me, son." They climbed down from the truck. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cold and clean. As they entered the diner, the eyes of the other truckers and the waitress locked onto the strange group. The veteran Roger, followed by a family that looked like they'd just walked out of a war zone, with damp clothes and mud-caked shoes. Roger walked with his head held high, daring anyone to say a word. He chose a booth in the corner and signaled for them to sit down. Adele tried to wipe the mud off the little girl's face with spit and her sleeve, ashamed of the filth in such a well-lit place. The waitress, an older woman named Lou, who had known Roger for years, came over with her notepad in hand. She looked at the family and then at Roger with a raised eyebrow, but asked no questions. "The usual, Roger?" she asked. "Yeah, Lou. And for them, bring the daily special. 4 plates, soup, meat and potatoes, plenty of bread, and hot milk for the kids." Bradley tried to protest again, whispering that it was too much, but Roger raised a calloused hand to silence him. "Bradley, pride is a luxury we poor folks can't afford when there are kids involved. Swallow your pride and let them fill their bellies. Tomorrow, you can worry about paying it back. Today, just worry about feeding your troops." Bradley lowered his head, defeated, and whispered a thank you that sounded more like a prayer than a word. When the food arrived, the scene was both heartbreaking and beautiful. The kids, Timmy and Sophie, stared at the steaming plates with wide eyes, but they didn't start eating until their father nodded. That level of discipline and respect in the middle of such need impressed Roger even more. They ate hungrily but minding their manners, wiping the plates clean with pieces of bread until they shone. Roger barely touched his coffee. He was fed just by watching the color return to the children's cheeks and seeing Adele's shoulders relax for the first time in hours. He realized it had been years since he'd shared a table with anyone. His loneliness, which he called independence, suddenly felt like a cold, empty prison compared to the warmth of this broken but united family. "You say you're a carpenter," Roger commented as Lou cleared the plates. Bradley wiped his mouth with the paper napkin. "Yes, sir. I make furniture, fix structures, carve wood, whatever needs doing. On the farm, I did all the repairs on the barn and the fences, but the new owner brought in his own people and said my work was old-fashioned." Roger let out a dry laugh. "Old-fashioned? Nowadays everything is plastic and glue. Real wood scares people who want everything fast." Roger pulled out a toothpick and chewed on it thoughtfully. "And mechanics, how good are you?" Bradley straightened up. "Keeping an old tractor running without original parts teaches you to improvise." "Sir, I know how to listen to an engine and tell what's hurting it before I even open it up." We're taking a pause in this roadside diner. Friends of tales of kindness. Bradley's story is the story of millions of craftsmen and manual laborers who are displaced by modernity or greed. But real talent never disappears. It just waits for the right opportunity. I want you to reflect. Has anyone ever given you a chance when no one else believed in you? Or have you been that helping hand? Comment the word opportunity if you believe destiny sometimes disguises itself as coincidence. And tell me what state you're joining us from on this journey. Roger paid the bill, leaving a generous tip, and signaled for them to head back to the truck. But before climbing in, he did something unexpected. "Pop the hood," Roger ordered Bradley, pointing to the front of the massive Kenworth. Bradley looked at him confused, but obeyed. The diesel engine, a beast of hot metal and oil, lay exposed under the parking lot lights. "I've been hearing a little noise in the alternator belt for the last 500 miles. A high-pitched squeal when I shift into fourth. No mechanic at the company shop can find it. They say I'm crazy. What do you see?" It was a test. Roger knew exactly what it was. A worn bearing that was hard to spot with the naked eye. He wanted to see if Bradley had an expert eye or if he was just a desperate talker. Bradley didn't ask for tools. He stepped up to the engine without fear of getting his clean hands dirty and started touching the belts, checking tension and slack. Adele and the kids watched from the sidewalk, holding their breath, instinctively understanding that the family's future depended on this improvised exam. Bradley spent 2 minutes inspecting in silence. Then he pointed to a small pulley at the bottom. "It's not the belt, sir. It's this tensioner pulley. It's slightly misaligned, just a few millimeters. When the engine vibrates at certain RPMs, the belt rubs against the metal edge. If you don't change it soon, that belt is going to snap and leave you stranded." Roger felt a shiver of satisfaction run through him. 3 certified mechanics hadn't seen it, but this man, standing in the rain with a barely full stomach, had diagnosed it in 2 minutes flat. "Close the hood," Roger said, hiding a smile beneath his thick gray mustache. "You're right. It's the pulley." Bradley wiped the grease from his fingers onto his worn-out pants with a look of relief. "Do you want me to try and adjust it, sir? With a wrench, I could probably—" Roger raised a hand. No time for that. I have to deliver this load before 6 a.m. "But you passed the test." Bradley didn't understand what test that was, but he didn't dare ask. They climbed back into the truck. This time, the atmosphere was different. They weren't just charity passengers anymore. Bradley had earned his spot in the cab on his own merit. Mutual respect was starting to cement a relationship that would change everyone's path. Roger started the engine and steered back onto the dark highway. 50 miles to go until the turnoff for Apple Valley, the family's destination. Roger watched the green signs pass by, debating with himself internally. His rational mind told him, drop them in town, give them some cash, and keep moving. Don't complicate your life, you've done enough. But his heart, that organ he thought had atrophied since his wife's death, was screaming something else entirely. He glanced at Timmy and Sophie sleeping peacefully in the rear bunk, hugging each other. He looked at Bradley's hands, resting restlessly on his knees. When the sign for Exit 45, Apple Valley, appeared, Roger didn't use his blinker. He held the wheel steady and sped the truck right past the exit. Bradley realized the mistake almost immediately. He watched the green sign for Apple Valley fade into the rearview mirror, and panic seized his chest. He leaned forward, gripping the back of Roger's seat, his knuckles turning white. "Sir, you passed the exit. That was our town," he exclaimed, his voice trembling, terrified that the kind trucker had suddenly turned into a kidnapper or a madman. Adele hugged the children tight, her eyes frantically searching for a way out of the locked cab. Roger didn't brake or turn the wheel. He kept his eyes on the road with a calm that clashed with his passengers' rising hysteria. "I didn't miss it, Bradley. Yes, I just decided not to stop there. If I left you at that junction at this hour, with rain and no money, the coyotes or the cold would have eaten you alive before dawn." "But where are you taking us?" Bradley insisted, torn between gratitude for the food and terror of the unknown. Roger sighed. It was the sound of a man carrying the weight of heavy decisions. "Apple Valley is a rough spot, kid. I've hauled cargo there. The foremen exploit the laborers, pay minimum wage, and the housing is just run-down motels. You have the hands of a craftsman and the eye of a mechanic. Taking your families there would be condemning them to repeat your poverty." Roger slowed down slightly to look him in the eye through the rearview mirror. "I'm going to my house. It's 2 hours north in Pine Ridge. I have a large workshop that's been closed for years. I need someone who knows the difference between a pulley and a belt. It's not charity, it's a job offer. I'm offering a roof over your head and a salary in exchange for you reviving my workshop." The proposal hung in the stale air of the cab. Bradley and Adele exchanged a look of total disbelief. A stranger offering them a home and a job after a 3-hour ride seemed too good to be true. And life had taught them that when something looks too good, it's usually a trap. Adele, with the protective instinct of a mother lion, spoke up with a firm voice. "And what do you gain from this, Mr. Roger? Nobody gives anything for free. What do you want from us?" Roger smiled sadly at the justified suspicion. "I gain peace of mind, ma'am. I gain knowing my property won't fall to pieces because I'm too old and too lonely to maintain it. And I gain company. The silence in my house is louder than this engine. If you don't like it when we arrive, I'll pay for your bus tickets back to wherever you want. But give me the benefit of the doubt, just for a week." Bradley looked at his sleeping children. Timmy was snoring softly, and Sophie had chocolate stains around her mouth from the milk she'd drunk. He thought about the apple pickers' camps, the mud, the uncertainty. Then he looked at Roger's broad back, a man who had given them food and warmth without asking for a thing. "We accept the trial week," Bradley said finally, feeling like he was betting his family's fate on a single high card. "But I want to make one thing clear. I will work hard. I don't want handouts. If my work isn't worth the pay, we leave." Roger nodded, satisfied. "Deal. Get some sleep now. The mountain road twists and turns a lot, and I need to focus. We'll get there by daybreak." The truck roared, as if approving the pact sealed between two men of honor. The rest of the journey passed in a different kind of silence, one heavy with expectation and fragile hope. As the truck climbed the winding mountain roads, the rain stopped completely, and the sky began to clear, painting itself in shades of violet and orange. Roger thought about his empty house. He hadn't set foot in his father's carpentry shop on the property for over a decade. He just used it to store old junk now. Maybe he was crazy for bringing 4 strangers into his sanctuary. But remembering the look in Bradley's eyes as he diagnosed the engine, Roger felt a spark of excitement he hadn't felt in years. It was the thrill of a project, of a future. Maybe, just maybe, God had put this family in his path not to save them, but to save himself. Let's take a moment to reflect here. Tales of kindness community. Roger's decision is a risky one. Opening the doors of your home to strangers requires a faith in humanity that few people have these days. What stops us from trusting our neighbors? Is it fear or experience? I want to read your honest opinions. If you were Roger, would you have taken the family home or left them in a safe place with some cash? Comment the word trust. If you believe the world needs more acts of blind faith like this one. The sun finally broke the horizon as the Kenworth turned onto a dirt road, kicking up a cloud of golden dust. They arrived at a sprawling property surrounded by pines and ancient oaks. In the center stood a large ranch-style house with shingle roof and wooden siding. It stood majestic, but neglected. The paint was peeling off. The garden was a jungle of weeds, and one of the second-floor windows was boarded up. To one side, a huge wood and metal shed served as a workshop and garage. "Welcome to the Haven," Roger announced, parking the truck in front of the shed. Bradley and Adele stepped down, stretching their numb legs, and gazed at the place in awe. Despite the obvious neglect, the house had good bones, as a carpenter would say. You could breathe in the pure air and peace. The children ran toward an old tire swing hanging from an oak tree, laughing for the first time in days and pretending to be cowboys in the Wild West. Roger guided them to the main house. As he opened the solid oak door, the musty smell of stale air and old dust greeted them. The interior was dim, filled with furniture covered in white sheets that looked like motionless ghosts. "Forgive the mess, or rather, the neglect," Roger murmured, opening the heavy curtains to let the morning light flood in. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight. Adele noticed the details. A dried-up cup of coffee on the table, a calendar from 5 years ago on the wall, dead plants in the pots. She understood immediately that this house wasn't just dirty, it was in mourning. Roger lived in his truck because the house was too full of memories of someone who was gone. "You folks can stay in the guest rooms on the ground floor," Roger said, pointing down a hallway. "There's hot water and clean beds. You just need to shake off the dust. I've got to check on the truck. Bradley, come with me." They went out to the shed. When Roger threw open the double doors of the workshop, Bradley gasped. Despite the cobwebs and stacked boxes, he was looking at paradise. There was a hardwood workbench, vintage woodworking tools hanging on the walls, a lathe, saws, all covered in rust and neglect but of exceptional quality, and in the back a mechanic's pit and engine tools. "My father was a carpenter. I'm a mechanic," Roger explained. "This place used to be the heart of the town. Now it's a graveyard for tools. Do you think you can bring it back to life?" Bradley walked over to the workbench and ran his hand across the wooden surface, wiping away the dust with reverence. He picked up a rusty chisel and tested its balance. His eyes shone with a mix of professional passion and gratitude. "Mr. Roger, with a little oil, sandpaper, and some love, this shop could produce the best furniture in the region. And with that pit, I can maintain your truck right here, saving you thousands a year in shop fees." Roger smiled as he watched Bradley's posture change. He was no longer the beggar hunched over in the rain. He was a master craftsman in his element. However, the moment of connection was shattered by the sound of a vehicle speeding down the dirt road. A modern pickup truck screeched to a halt in front of the shop, and a man jumped out, slamming the door. The man who stepped out was young, about 38, dressed in designer clothes that looked completely out of place in these dusty, rural surroundings. It was Stephen, Roger's only son. His face, though it bore the same strong features as his father's, was twisted in a grimace of disgust and arrogance. He barged into the shed without asking permission, ignoring the beauty of the antique tools, and headed straight for Roger. "What the hell is going on here, Dad?" he shouted, his voice booming off the wooden walls. Then he turned his scornful gaze toward Bradley, scanning him up and down like he was a plague. "And who is this guy? Now you're picking up bums off the highway to let them steal the little you have left?" Bradley instinctively took a step back and lowered his head, used to being treated like he was invisible by men like Stephen. But Roger stepped between his son and his new employee, chest puffed out and eyes sparking with fury. "Watch your tongue, Stephen," Roger warned in a low, dangerous voice that made his son hesitate for a second. "This man is Bradley, the new shop foreman, and he's here because I invited him. This is my house, in case you forgot while you were busy spending my money in the city." Stephen let out an incredulous, cruel laugh. "Shop foreman? Please, Dad. This place is a ruin. No one has hammered a nail in here for 10 years. You're clearly going senile, and these opportunists are taking advantage of you." Stephen walked around Bradley, invading his personal space. "Listen to me, pal. I don't know what fairy tale you sold the old man, but you're not getting a single cent out of here. This property is in the process of being sold, so take your family and get the hell out before I call the cops for trespassing." Bradley felt shame burning his face. He didn't want to be the cause of a family fight. "Mr. Roger, maybe it's better if we go. We don't want any trouble with your family," he murmured, looking around for his few belongings. But Roger grabbed his arm firmly, stopping him from moving. "You are not going anywhere. The only one not needed here is him. Roger turned to Stephen. Sale? What sale are you talking about? I haven't signed anything. I've told you 1,000 times, the haven is not for sale. Your mother's memories are here. You grew up here. The mention of his mother seemed to harden Stephen even more. Mom is dead, Dad, and you're always on the road. A developer is offering me a fortune for the land to build luxury condos. It's a golden opportunity, and I'm not going to let your nostalgia or your dementia ruin it. Stephen's true motivation came to light, pure had greed. He saw his childhood home not as a home, but as a real estate asset he could liquidate to fund his lifestyle. The presence of Bradley and his family was an unexpected obstacle in his plan to declare his father incompetent to take control of the assets. Look around you, Dad, Stephen insisted, pointing at the dust and boxes. You live like a hermit. You need professional help, not playing house with strangers. If you don't kick these people out today, I'm going to the courthouse to file for your incapacitation. I'll say you've lost your mind and that you're putting your assets at risk. And believe me, with your history of isolation, the judge will believe me. The threat landed like a bomb of ice in the heat of the workshop. Upon seeing the woman and the children, Stephen's expression shifted from anger to absolute disgust. Just great, he brought the whole tribe. What is this, a charity shelter? He snapped, pointing an accusing finger at Adele. I bet they're already plotting to take over the house using squatters' rights. They're nothing but parasites. Adele, who had endured hunger and cold with dignity, couldn't stand this insult to her integrity. She handed the little girl to Timmy and took a step forward, eyes filled with tears of rage, but her voice steady. Sir, we aren't parasites, we are workers. Your father offered us a roof in exchange for reviving this place that you apparently have left to die. Maybe if you visited your father more, he wouldn't have to look for family on the road. Adele's words hit Stephen where it hurt most, in his ego and his hidden guilt. Roger looked at Adele with admiration and then at his son with a final, absolute disappointment. You heard her, Stephen. Get out, now. Roger walked over to a shelf and picked up a heavy wrench, not to use it, but as a symbol that he was on his turf, in his workshop. This is my property. My name is on the deed. My sweat paid for every brick, and as long as I'm breathing, I decide who comes in and who goes out. Bradley stays, Adele stays, you go. And if you try that dirty play in court, I'll spend every last penny of my savings on lawyers to disinherit you. Don't test me, son. You know I'm stubborn as a mule. The determination of the old trucker, that strength that let him drive 20 hours straight, surfaced with full power. Stephen, realizing he had pushed too far and that his father wasn't as weak as he thought, decided to make a tactical retreat. He backed toward his truck, but not without launching one last venomous threat. This isn't over, Dad. Enjoy your new friends while you can. Once the judge sees you've got homeless bums living in squalor with underage kids, child services and the cops are gonna swarm this place. You're gonna regret this. He hopped into his truck, peeled out in a cloud of dust, and disappeared down the road. The silence he left behind was heavy, thick with fear. Bradley slumped onto a bench, burying his head in his hands. I'm so sorry, Roger. We brought this war to your doorstep. We should pack up and leave tonight. Roger walked over, put a hand on Bradley's shoulder, and gave it a firm squeeze. No, Bradley, you folks didn't bring this war. The war was already here. It was just cold and silent before. All you did was bring it out into the open. Roger sighed, staring down the road where his son had vanished. Stephen, he's always chased the easy money. He never understood the value of building something with your own two hands. If you leave now, he wins. And I'm left alone, just waiting to die in some nursing home. Die. I need you to stay, not just for the workshop, but to prove to the judge, the world, and my own son that this place is still alive and kicking. I need us to make this shop shine so bright that nobody can ever claim I've lost my mind. It was a plea disguised as an order. Roger was asking them to fight beside him in the battle for his own life. Bradley looked up at Adele. She nodded slowly, with that quiet courage mothers have when they know it's time to fight. Then let's get to work, boss, Bradley said, standing up and grabbing a rag to wipe down the bench. We're going to fix this place up so nice your son will feel ashamed to even step foot inside. Over the next week, the haven underwent a miraculous transformation. Bradley and Adele worked from sunup to sundown. They scrubbed, fixed, painted, and oiled everything in sight. The song of saws and hammers echoed through the valley once again. The kids helped out by weeding the garden and even started a small vegetable patch with tomatoes and corn, dreaming of their first backyard barbecue. And for the first time in years, Roger slept in a real bed and ate home-cooked meals, like Adele's famous apple pie made from scratch. But the shadow of Stephen's threat still loomed over them. Just as they were finishing the front door, a police cruiser and a city official's car pulled into the driveway. The official car pulled up right next to Stephen's truck. Two social workers stepped out with folders tucked under their arms, followed by a cop who looked bored out of his mind. Stephen, who'd arrived minutes earlier to stage the scene, greeted them with a triumphant grin. "There they are," he shouted, pointing a finger at Bradley and the kids playing on the porch. "Just like I said in the report. Illegal squatters, children at risk, and a senile old man who can't take care of himself." Roger stepped out of the house, wiping his hands on a rag with a calmness that completely threw the officials off. He didn't shout, he didn't run. He just stood there in his freshly varnished doorway, flanked by Bradley and Adele. "Good morning, officer. To what do we owe the honor of this visit? Especially without a warrant?" Roger asked, his voice steady as a rock. The social worker, a stern-looking woman, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Roger, we've received a serious report concerning the living conditions here, as well as your mental health." "Well, come on in then. See for yourselves," Roger invited, swinging the door wide open. Stephen expected to see the chaos and filth from last week, but when he stepped inside, his jaw hit the floor. The house wasn't a wreck. It smelled like beeswax, fresh-baked bread, and flowers. The furniture was fixed up, the floors sparkled, and there wasn't a single speck of dust. Adele had transformed that mausoleum into a warm, dignified home, even adding patriotic touches like an American flag on the mantel. The social worker walked through the rooms, checked the fully stocked kitchen, and saw the kids, clean, well-dressed in clothes Roger bought in town, and quietly doing their homework at the dining table. "Where exactly is the risk, Mr. Stephen?" the official asked, clearly annoyed that her time was being wasted. "This is a perfectly functional home. In fact, it's better kept than a lot of the houses I visit." Stephen, desperate as he watched his plan fall apart, switched tactics. "It's all a front. My father is crazy. He picked these bums up off the street. I bet they're drugging him or manipulating him." Roger walked over to an antique desk and pulled out a leather folder. "Son, you underestimate yourself, and you certainly underestimate me," Roger said with a coldness that froze the room. "I knew you'd come here with this story. That's why I went into town yesterday. Right here, I have a clean bill of mental health signed by the head psychiatrist at the regional hospital, and a notarized affidavit naming Bradley as my property manager and live-in employee with a legal contract." Roger handed the papers to the police officer. "These bums are my employees and my guests. You, Stephen, are the only intruder here." The officer scanned the documents and nodded. "Everything looks to be in order here, Mr. Stephen. Filing false reports with social services is a serious crime. I suggest you leave now before I decide to haul you down to the station for harassment and wasting public resources." Stephen's humiliation was absolute in front of the strangers he looked down on. His own father had beaten him using the exact same laws he tried to weaponize. Stephen stared at Roger with hatred, but also a new kind of fear. The old trucker wasn't an easy target. "You're going to regret this, Dad. When they steal everything you have, don't come crying to my door." Roger looked at him with sadness, not anger. "I won't come, son, because I've already found my family. They might not have my blood, but they have my honor." Stephen stormed out of the house, jumped in his truck, and peeled away, disappearing from Roger's life forever. When the dust settled and the officers left with their apologies, a silence of pure relief filled the haven. Adele collapsed into a chair and broke down crying, finally letting go of days of fear. Bradley hugged Roger. It was a clumsy hug, but filled with immense gratitude. "I thought you were going to kick us out to save yourself, boss," Bradley confessed. Roger patted him on the back. "Bradley, you fixed my truck's engine, and the engine of my life. I'd never kick you out. Now, dry those tears. We've got a furniture order to finish. Folks in town are raving about your work." With Stephen out of the way, the haven flourished. What started as a makeshift repair shop turned into the travelers' carpentry and mechanics. The combination was unusual but effective. Truckers would stop to fix their engines and end up buying handmade furniture for their wives or even custom gun racks for their pickups. Bradley turned out to be a genius with wood, creating unique pieces that soon had a waiting list. Roger stopped driving long haul. He sold the old truck and bought a delivery van for the furniture. His new route was short but full of satisfaction. He spent his afternoons teaching Timmy how to carve wood and Sophie how to tend the garden, becoming the grandfather he never got to be for Stephen's kids, and sharing stories of classic American road trips. 5 years passed. The Haven wasn't an abandoned house anymore. It was the heart of the community. Adele managed the books with impeccable efficiency. Bradley had 2 helpers in the shop. And Roger, well, Roger got older, yes, but he didn't fade away. Every wrinkle on his face now came from a smile, not a worry. One rainy afternoon, just like the day they met, Roger sat on the porch with Bradley to watch the rain. That night, I almost kept driving, Roger confessed, staring into the storm. I almost sped up and left you all behind. What a mistake that would have been. I would have died alone in that cold cab. Bradley smiled while sanding a wooden toy. But you stopped, Roger. That's what counts. You stopped when nobody else did. Roger passed away peacefully in his bed one winter night, surrounded by Bradley, Adele, Timmy, and Sophie. There was no loneliness, no fear. His will was simple and clear. The Haven and all his assets went to Bradley and Adele, with a special clause creating a scholarship fund for Timmy and Sophie. To Stephen, he left just one thing: his old empty toolbox with a note that read, "So you can learn to build your own life instead of trying to steal it from others." It was one final lesson from a father who, right to the end, tried to teach values, even if he had to be tough. The story of Roger and the Rain family became a local legend. It teaches us that family isn't defined by DNA, but by loyalty and mutual care. Roger saved Bradley from poverty, but Bradley saved Roger from loneliness. They rescued each other. It reminds us that sometimes, the unexpected detours on the road of life, those moments when we decide to hit the brakes and help a stranger, are the ones that lead us to our true destiny. Real wealth wasn't found in selling the land, but in the shared dinners, the noise of the workshop, and the laughter of children filling an empty house. Thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation and hope here at Tales of Kindness. We hope Roger's story inspires you to keep your eyes open on your own path. You never know when your decision to help might change someone's world, including your own. If this story touched your heart, we have a small request. Type the word loyalty in the comments and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that there are still good people in this world. Subscribe for more stories that feed the soul. And remember, when you see someone walking in the rain, don't speed up. They might just be carrying the miracle you've been waiting for.